Hi, welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host, Allen Ulrich, here on a special night with Bob Rose. Not much was going on last night. I know most of you guys probably went to bed early, watched a little Netflix, and then just kind of went on your way. And today is just another day because all the big news happened on Monday, not yesterday. Lattimore actually was kind of like we expected that shoe to drop. But, Dennis Allen, clearly, he got let go. He was relieved of his coaching duties. A lot of fans think it was probably 6 weeks too late. What was I was surprised they did it. Because I really thought, I think if it was up to Loomis, he was going to. I really thought they were going to let him play out the season and then make the call then.
Alan, I did too. Even though I'd written about it several times, I've talked about it several times. That I felt that the time had come and gone. Had been past time. For them to make a move. But as you and I had agreed on several times, that's not the way the Saints, the Benson family, or Mickey Loomis does business. So I was a little bit surprised. Although I did start to get the feeling immediately after the Panthers game, you know what? This might actually be it. So when the shoe did drop on Monday morning, we at the Saints News Network, we were prepared. Now my network was down. My internet network was down, of course. So poor John had to shoulder all those article responsibilities that day. But we were, by the time the news actually became official, we already knew, and we were prepared for it.
Yeah, I have to say, Nick Underhill had his story in the can, ready to release. I had said to somebody the other day, because, when you lose to Carolina, and I compared it, my little good, bad, and ugly, to the Saints losing to Tampa in 1977 and Mike Dicker losing to the Cleveland Browns. They were 0-8, I think. That was when you hit that breaking point when you're going, okay, you are the worst team in the league and you are not going to get any better. That you have run your course. And Dennis Allen in the post game looked like a broken man. Yep. He looked like a guy who knew his job was on the line winning that game. And some of the calls he made during that game made me think that this was a guy who was, playing for his job. Although, I really don't want to talk much about that Carolina game, but it was once again, it all unraveled in the fourth quarter. Why he didn't go for it. I get you nursing a 5-point lead, but you got a 6-game losing streak. Just go for it. You went for it twice already. Go for it again. The fans aren't going to hate you if you don't get it then. Because you knew at some point the defense was going to break, because that's what they do. The penalties are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then you miss the penalty on Alvin Kamara that would have given you a first down. Even though he didn't bring him down, he still yanked him. And that's technically still a horse collar. You don't have to tackle him. And that would have converted 2nd and 13 and whatever the hell it was to 1st and 10.
Yep.
And the drive probably keeps going. It's just this game played like dead man walking.
Yeah,
it really did. So I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked that he got let go. And then, of course, the story that Underhill broke that everyone's picked up is how this was driven by Gail. Gail Benson went to the players, went to the leaders on that team, and asked them, what is wrong? What is going on that you guys are playing like this? because she was clearly promised by probably Mickey and Dennis that once we get healthy, we can win these games again. We can start winning. And you're getting healthier, but you're not playing better. So what do you have to say about, what happened with Gail? Because she's the one that made the call clearly over Mickey.
Yeah, she did make the call. And even though for the most part, since Mr. Benson died, what was that, 2018, 2019?
2018, yeah, 2018.
Gail has stayed out of football matters. She's let Mickey Loomis, Jeff Ireland, Dennis Lauscha handle it along with her coaches. But 100% this move was her call. Because if Mickey Loomis had his way, Dennis Allen would still be the New Orleans Saints coach today. 100%, zero doubt about it. Mm-hmm. And we all knew that. Monday morning too. We had to wait for our own stories. Nick is often the first to break it, but he's not always the first to know it. We often find things out all at the same time. And all the rumors about how Mickey wanted to keep Dennis and Gail overruled him. That's 100% true. And I don't expect Gail Benson to be heavily involved in football decisions from here on out, because that's not in her wheelhouse. That's not where she feels comfortable. But in this particular case, it's very clear that she, from the owner's box, had enough of the product that was on the field. And you're right. I'm sure that she was promised the excuses that we were all hearing week after week after week. Mm-hmm. We're playing. The results aren't there because we're injured. When we get healthy, we'll get back to playing 100%. Or we'll get back to the product that you saw early in the season, or whatever spin they wanted to put on it. But like you said, and not just the Panthers game, but the week before against the Chargers, you were starting to see some healthy players come back. Mm-hmm. And there was still, and I suppose they aren't mathematically out of it yet, but there was still a realistic shot, even going into the Carolina game. After losing 6 straight, you win that Panthers game, and then you win Atlanta this week, and you're right back in the thick of at least the divisional race, maybe not the wild card race, but the divisional race. And the comment that Mickey Loomis had made 2 weeks prior about you got to look beyond the results or look past the results. We all knew that was bullshit. And I think it took Gail Benson a couple weeks to realize that it was bullshit. But again, it's just this move stunk of the owner saying, I have had enough.
Yeah, I was at the Denver game, and we were there because of Drew, and we wanted to see Drew and Sean. And I saw Gail out there, and she was out there at halftime for Drew's induction into the Saints Hall of Fame. And when, that towel.
Yes, Matt actually sent that to me.
Yes, so he did. He grabbed a whole bunch of them from the stadium. We got one for John Butler. We got one for you. We got a handful of them. But I was at that game for those reasons, and it was akin to a homecoming game, mm-hmm. as far as the Saints fans were concerned. And that team played so poorly. They were never really ever in this game.
No.
And after halftime, you can see the people turning out and leaving. And by the fourth quarter, the stadium was pretty much empty. And Alvin Kamara talked about that, mm-hmm. saying, he doesn't blame people for leaving because, we're putting out a bad product. I think that set it off for Gail right then. Because you lost to Kansas City, you lost your quarterback to Kansas City. Kansas City is arguably one of the best teams in the league, even though they're not really playing like it. They are one of the best teams in the league. They won the Super Bowl, 3 times out of the past 4 years. They're probably going to the Super Bowl again this year.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of excuse, hey, we didn't look very good against the Super Bowl champs in their stadium.
Right.
But against Tampa, you had a second quarter that looked good, and then you fell apart in the second half. Your third game in 3 weeks was the Denver game, and you looked absolutely dreadful in that game. Your players looked like they wanted to be anywhere but on that field. So I think that's when Gayle was like, okay, you know what? We weren't even remotely competitive in that game. And I know we didn't have Carr, and I know we didn't have this guy, and we didn't have that guy. But we didn't even look competitive. They just walked right through us. Denver couldn't run the ball until that game. They ran for 200 yards.
Right.
All the things we've talked about already. And Dennis and Mickey probably told Gayle, look, 3 games in 10 days, we're beat to hell. Our players were exhausted. They had no business playing that Thursday night game. We will be better when we get back from this bye against the Chargers. And they weren't better. And then you play against the worst team in the NFL, Carolina Panthers. They're an absolute train wreck. Against a quarterback you demolished, who got benched, and you basically were fighting tooth and nail with Carolina on their field in front of a quarter full stadium, if that much. I mean, there was no crowd noise. It reminded me of a COVID game, honestly.
Yeah.
It was that quiet. And you look terrible. You had flashes. You could see some guys trying. Alvin Kamara at 155 yards. In fact, he's 19 yards away from passing Mark Ingram for the all-time rushing. They must have said about 1,000 times that he just passed Marshall Faulk for combined 1,000-yard rushing, receiving. So I mean, there were some guys that were trying, but there were a lot of guys like they weren't. And I think that's when Gayle said, look, I've been talking to the players since the Denver game, and they've told me we have a lack of leadership. People aren't listening to you anymore. They tuned you out. They're not responding to anything you're saying. And the players feel like there's no accountability. I've seen the comment that Carr has a different set of rules than anybody else. That's Jim Haslett and Aaron Brooks. That's not Dennis Allen and Carr. I think that's some people injecting their opinion in a perception because Carr's hurt. Well, I mean, that was last year. Last year felt like Carr had a separate set of rules than anybody else. Not this year's Carr. I think this year the failure is leadership. The team, and that's what we talked about last week too, that the team was not responding to Dennis Allen's, I guess, motivation, if you want to put that. They weren't responding to that, and there was no, there was no energy, nothing coming from the players that we're going to take ownership. If our coach can't do it, we're going to take ownership. Right. And I think that's the stuff that bothered Gayle the most, that we're just going through the season, and then it's like, oh, well, I got to still get paid, like quote Dak Prescott, we effing suck, but I'm still getting paid. I mean, that's another team that's in disarray. Yeah. So, I mean, that sound like a fair assessment?
Yeah, pretty much. And, what basically all that meant was, all that means is, and you and I already knew this, not only Mickey Loomis, that much is obvious, but Gail Benson too, holds Dennis Allen in high regards, values loyalty, not only from Dennis, but has always valued loyalty, in this organization. And that is the only reason why Dennis Allen got as many chances as he did. I wrote that if they didn't have a game against Denver 3 days after the fact, that he should have been gone the night of the Tampa Bay blowout, because you don't give up 51 points at home and get routed by your divisional rival in your building. But to make a change right then, when you had a game 3 days later, is just unrealistic. But then you lost to Denver, and you not only lost to Denver, you were so listless against your former coach at home on prime time again. And you had the extra 3 or 4 days before you had to take the field again. Mm-hmm. That's when the move should have been made. But again, because it's Dennis Allen, and because they like him as a person, they hold him in high regard for what he has done for the organization. And folks, he has done a lot. They gave him those extra chances, but enough was enough. And I agree with you. I do believe that Gail was right after that Denver game. She started then at least pulling certain players aside. Hey, can you tell me what's really going on here? And she had heard enough to base her own opinion, not just on a knee-jerk emotional move, but what was happening on the football field with your football team, from the players who were in the fray day in and day out.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the players I think she talked to are Cam Jordan, Alvin Kamara, Tyrann Mathieu, Demario Davis. Those are the guys she talked to. And because that's where your leadership is on the defensive side of the ball. And they're the ones that have been there long enough. Tyrann Mathieu, maybe not so much, but the other ones have been there to see the success. What did Sean do that Dennis isn't doing? And I'm sure they rattled off a whole list of things because he's not that kind of coach. And that much is obvious. And it's just, it gets to the point that when a team stops listening to their coach, it's not the same as quitting on their coach, but they stop listening to their coach. It's one of those things where you can just, it's time to go. It's time to go. I mean, Jim Moore's diddly poo rant was two things. Number one, he saw his favorite player of all time, Sam Mills, completely dismantle his defense, his offense. His defense was already in disarray, but it completely dismantled his offense. And the second thing was Moore had felt by that point that his message to this team had grown stale and old. They weren't responding to that stuff anymore. It was a different group. He had lost all his leadership. He had lost all the players that he had brought in. And experienced all that success. Sam Mills was the last one. He was the last member of the Dome Patrol, and he was pissed that they did what they did to him. And for those of you who don't know, Sam wanted to get a new contract from the Saints. Jim Miller, Jim Moore, and Bill Kuharich were the triumvirate they had as a general manager after Jim Finks died. Jim Miller and Bill Kuharich said, no, Sam's getting old. We don't really want to pay him a whole heck of a lot. Let him go out and see what kind of money he thinks he can get from another team, and then we'll decide if we're going to match it. Well, Sam got pissed because he's like, I've been playing for this team and sacrificed for this team, and this is how you're going to treat me? But they did the same thing basically to Morton Anderson the year before.
Yeah.
You know, that's too much money for a kicker. We can get a kicker a lot cheaper. Cut him, which was, I can't believe we're saying this. Cut him, and then we'll bring him back on a cheaper contract. Morton's not going anywhere. No one's going to pay him that kind of money. Atlanta said, hell yeah, that's the guy who keeps killing us. We'll take him. So, yeah. It's just when it got to that point, Moore is just like, that's it. I got nothing left for these guys. I'm pissed. I can't take this. And he goes in his diddly poo rant. And then for the first time since 1996, because we didn't fire Mike Ditka until after the season was over with, same thing with Jim Haslett, we haven't had an interim head coach. I'm not counting the Bounty Gate year because that's just crap.
Right.
I'm talking about when a coach quitting or getting fired. We haven't had to deal with one since 1996. Rick Venturi took over for that Saints team in 96.
Yeah.
He was the defensive coordinator. God.
I know.
You thought Pete Carmichael was bad. Rick Venturi survived 3 head coaches. Jim Moore brought him in. He survived to be part of Mike Ditka's staff. He survived Ditka and was part of Jim Haslett's staff. It's unbelievable. That man made it that long. And Rick Venturi has been the interim head coach plenty of times before that. He was the interim head coach of the Colts one year, and they were terrible then too.
Yep.
So interim head coaches don't have a great record with the Saints. They generally win one game, and that's it.
If you're curious, and actually, it's interesting because of the 5 interim head coaches, they actually have a 3-2 record in their first game.
Yeah.
But their overall record, the 5 of them together, 5-26. So that says it all.
Yeah, I'm not. John North isn't listed in there, is he? On your list of.
No, I don't consider North.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was a mess in and of itself that perfectly embodied the Mecomb era.
Yeah.
But no, I have J.D. Roberts, Ernie Hepperly,
yeah,
Dick Stanfill, Wade Phillips, and Rick Venturi.
Yeah. Because what happened was, for those of you who are way too young to remember, they used to have 6 preseason games in a 14-game season. In 1973, after the 5th preseason game, John Mecomb fired J.D. Roberts and appointed John North interim head coach. After the 5th preseason game, no less. You should have fired him in 74 when he only won 2 games. But he kept him until the 5th preseason game, then fired him. And 2 weeks later was the biggest rout and the most lopsided loss in Saints history. The Atlanta Falcons came to the Tulane Stadium and beat them 62-7. Beat them like a drum. And ironically, the Saints went 5-10 or 5-9 that year. After that game, they got beat by the Falcons 62-7. The following week, I think they got beat by the Cowboys 40-3. And they went on to win 5 games that year. And it tied their best record to that point, winning 5 games. My God. So when some people keep telling me, God, it's never been any worse. I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
It's been a lot worse. It really has. If fans today had to sit through a 62-7, then a 40-3 back-to-back beatdowns, that facility and airline drive would be on fire.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. I can't imagine that today. So Darren Rizzi, if he does what most of the interim head coaches have done, won their first game, because J.D. Roberts, that's actually the Tom Dempsey game, his first game as a head coach. He won his. Wade Phillips won his first game when Bum resigned after the Minnesota game in 1985, and he beat the Rams. Dick Stanfill did not win his first game. He lost the next 2, including that infamous 49ers game where the Saints blew a 35-21 or 35-7. I think
it was 35-7.
Yeah. and Joe Montana came back and beat them 38-35 in Candlestick. He had to wait till week 14 to beat the Jets in Old Shea Stadium. But does Rizzi win his first game as an interim head coach?
I mean, this is Saints Falcons, so anything can happen. And I do think that I continue to believe that that the Falcons are fool's gold, and complete frauds. But the Saints are not a good team, man, and you know this. It wouldn't surprise me if the Saints went out there and beat them, and they should have beat them back in week 4.
Yeah, they should have.
But if I'm a betting man, I'm not wagering any of my money on it. I do expect this team under Rizzi to play harder, to play with emotion, and you do see this a lot throughout the NFL. That for a week, 2 weeks, maybe 3, after a team makes let's ignore the Jets, a normal team. Fires a head coach in midseason, they usually do play with some degree of higher increased passion, for a couple of weeks until that wears off. And then you remember, then they show the talent level that got their, the original coach fired. That's kind of what I expect to happen here. Because I've come to the realization that, the Saints are not, I know the injuries. Yeah, I know the age. But I also believe that the Saints are not nearly as talented as what at least I thought they were coming into this season. And I think that that's going to rear itself the rest of the year.
I think age has caught up with a lot of the key members of that defense.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems. I mean, Cam Jordan's a non-factor. Jordan thought last year his problem was the ankle injury, and that kept him from being as explosive as he used to be. But he's old, and he's lost a step and a half now.
Yeah.
Demario Davis is busting his butt. He's one of the ones I know didn't quit, but he's not showing the explosiveness he used to. And it could be lingering hamstrings. I don't know. Tyrann Mathieu, as we talk about, makes business decisions sometimes, and that's hurting him. It's showing up in a lot of areas on the team. Now, one of the good plays, one of the things I was really impressed with in the Carolina game, now granted, Carolina's passing game is not good, but, you had Alante Taylor and a guy that you brought up from the practice squad and Stanley Jean-Charles, and he made a Robert Meacham-like interception.
Yeah.
That was just an incredible play. And the secondary was not a liability against the Panthers.
Not like I thought it would. And like you said, let's call a spade a spade. It's not like they were going up against a Drew Brees passing attack or even anything resembling a mediocre passing game. But I still expected Bryce Young to put up 250 and Mingo or Leggett to end up with 120 receiving. So they pleasantly said, now Alante Taylor is a player. I think we can all agree on that. But I thought that even if they wouldn't victimize Jean-Charles, that they would find that third corner, or they would find Jordan Howden or that extra safety when he was in the game and just victimize them. And to their credit, to the Saints secondary's credit, that did not happen.
Do you think, aside from the fact that Lattimore was going to get moved based on whether or not they won that game, but do you think that's also why they felt comfortable moving on from Lattimore the way they did?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. I mean, they like Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Kool-Aid's shown us some flashes. Why he was a second-round pick. So I think they recognized, we can pass the torch over to Kool-Aid. It's time. He's going to take his lumps, But yeah, he's a talent. This is why we drafted him. He's showing us why. But then, Gene Charles played well. Rico Payton played extremely well during the preseason, as we all know. So they still felt like, even without Paulson and Debo, that they had the depth and, more importantly, the young players here, where without Lattimore on this roster, we can see even more if we have a true cornerback unit, or if that has to be added to our lengthy list of needs this offseason.
Yeah, and that's my thing too, is, I want to talk about the Lattimore trade now, but the Saints have managed, like they did under Peyton with running backs, they've managed to find these undrafted free agents and turn them into good cornerbacks. And that's one of the, if we're going to praise Dennis Allen for anything, that's one of the things he was able to do as both a defensive coordinator and as a head coach. Find an Isaac Gidham, find a, Rico Payton, a Stanley. Is it Stanley Jean or Stanley Jean?
See, and
I'm going to give that French pronunciation, just like when we had Jean-Baptiste. I'm going to give the French pronunciation because you're in Louisiana, buddy.
Right, exactly. And that's the way I pronounce it too, but I actually believe that it's probably pronounced Gene. Yeah.
Yeah, it may be. But, you can develop these cornerbacks and you can do things with it. And I'll be honest with you, I was actually surprised the Saints got as much as they got for trading Lattimore to Washington. Of course, the Commanders fans are all like, we paid too much. But yeah, for a guy who's 28 years old with a pretty big contract, and they were able to parlay that into a third-round pick. I don't know which third-round pick they got. The Redskins the Commanders have multiple third-round picks. If memory serves, they've got the Miami pick, Tennessee's pick, and their own. So one of those three got traded. I could be wrong, but I knew the Miami one's the higher one right now. So I don't know which third-round pick they got. But they're talking about the Saints now having, and then I think they gave up a fifth and got a sixth and a fourth out of that as well.
Yeah.
So the Saints have a considerable amount of ammo now. I think they've got 4 picks in the top 100. And, we've been doing this since talking about 2017. I said the reason why that class was so damn good is because you had 6 picks in the top 100 players.
Yeah.
To me, and this is if you tank, which I don't think they're going to tank, but I just think they're not going to win because they're not good. But if you tank and you stay in the top 5, I'm tempted to trade down out of the top 5 into, say, 9, 10. You're still in the top 10, but somewhere around there. So I can pick up an extra, maybe a second, so I'm up to now 5, 6 players in the top 100 again. And God, that's given me a lot of ammo, a lot of good players to rebuild my roster with a new coach.
And you and I both know that Mickey Loomis never and ever has traded down in the first round. But I like I like the thought process on one condition. If you decide that you like a quarterback, and I don't like the quarterbacks in this class.
I don't either.
We're not the ones drafting. If you decide that you like a quarterback where you're sitting with your top 3, top 5 draft pick, then you got to stay put and get him. Now, there's plenty of time for speculation on that. Who's going to come, what quarterbacks are going to come out, where the Saints are actually going to finish in the draft, who's going to be the GM, who's going to be the coach. So there's no point in us speculating who could be that quarterback and who wouldn't be that quarterback, because all those other questions have to be answered first. So, and folks, we have plenty of time to do that. It doesn't make any sense to get into the discussion now.
Oh yeah.
But
I just meant in terms of getting what you got for Lattimore.
Right.
And what you're looking at now.
And, I didn't think that Lattimore would be traded coming up to the week. because of the dead cap money that the Saints are inheriting, which is 36.5 million over the next 2 years. I didn't think that they would take that financial hit unless it was a higher pick involved. I didn't think it would be a first, but I thought maybe they'd do it for a second. A third and a fourth, and don't tell me, folks, that they did, that they got 3 picks, third, fourth, and sixth. Now they got a third and a fourth. They basically did a pick swap, 5 for 6. So you got Lattimore for 2 picks. I wish the return were greater, but you are talking about a cornerback who has missed the equivalent of one full season over the last 2.5 years. Now I've openly questioned Lattimore's. I'm going to try to put this as politically correct as I can. I've openly questioned Lattimore's desire to play with pain given the situation. Yeah. That sounds right. We'll see. I mean, he's not expected to play for Washington in week 9. But my wonderment is how quickly is that hamstring going to heal now that he's playing for a 7-2 team? If it's a legitimate hamstring injury, and we know that that's problematic for cornerbacks, and Lattimore has a history of them, then you're talking about a 28-year-old cornerback who's now become injury prone with a high price tag, and you got a third and a fourth round for him. Again, I consider Lattimore maybe not a franchise icon, but certainly the best cornerback, if not the best defensive back in team history. So, I mean, it's a bittersweet parting, but I'm cautiously optimistic that the Saints at least recognized we need to get younger and we need to get more draft picks, and this is one of the ways that we can do it. Yeah.
To me, getting multiple picks, and if you look at the players of Lattimore's caliber as cornerbacks who got traded, Snead from Kansas City, for example, that was only a third round pick.
Yep.
They got for him. Jalen Ramsey, I think, was a third that they got for him. So that's pretty much his market value. You can argue, well, he's a better cornerback than either of those guys. If this was 2017, 2018, even 2019, I would agree with you.
Yeah, up through 2021, I'd 100% agree.
But he's not that guy anymore. And you and I have questioned Lattimore's desire, even when the Saints were good. When he wasn't going up against an elite receiver, he kind of sleptwalked his way. And he always had trouble with speed receivers. He likes physical receivers. He loves Mike Evans. He likes playing against Julio Jones. He liked playing against, I'm trying to think of some of the other physical corners or physical receivers he played against.
DK Metcalf, AJ Brown. Yeah, he did well against all those guys. And you look at from Washington's perspective, they're in a division with CD Lamb, AJ Brown. Lattimore's a good pickup for them if he's healthy.
Exactly. But when he had to play against Antonio Brown in 2018, when he had to play against speed receivers, he wasn't very good. It's not that he sucked. That's not what I'm saying, because too often that's how people react. You're either an elite player or you suck. That wasn't his strength. He's not a guy. He
went from elite to a good, very good range.
He's going to get beat by stop and goes and that kind of stuff against a speed receiver because he just doesn't have the speed to keep up with those guys. He liked physical guys. We can reroute them. He can go through them, especially ones that were bigger than him. He would try and go through them to disrupt passes, and he'd get away with it because it's like, okay, it's a big guy. Y'all both fighting for the ball. It's perfectly legal. I thought one of his best ever games, well, the Detroit game in 2017 was really good. But one of his best ever games was against the Eagles in that playoff game where he had 2 interceptions. That was his kind of game, and he won that game for us. Make no mistake, our offense played terrible that day. We were really flat. And I was shocked how flat we were for that game. I thought we were far more up for the Panthers game when you're playing Cam Newton, and then you go against the Eagles and you look like crap because you beat that team 45-7 or whatever, and it was like you expecting to do that again, and it just wasn't happening. So, I applaud the trade. He was one of the few players that you could trade on this team too. You couldn't trade Kamara because you just renegotiated that deal. Couldn't trade Taysom Hill because you just did that deal before the season began. Nobody is trading for Cam Jordan or Demario Davis or Tyrann Mathieu.
Nope. So
you were down to Carr and young guys.
And I suggested Chase Young. I'd suggested Chase Young in an article, but you wouldn't have gotten nearly this kind of return. The way someone would have traded for Chase, I'm convinced, based off of the P word, the potential, and all the measurables that he has. But I couldn't see the Saints getting anything more than an early to mid day 3 pick at most.
Yeah. And he's on a 1-year deal anyway, so you're getting a guy for a rental.
Right.
And I think one of the Chase Young's biggest problems is he lacks closing speed, and that's showing up. It's not. People used to think that was hustle and effort. It's not. It's just he doesn't have that closing speed. Detroit supposedly wanted to trade for Carl Granderson. That was a rumor that had come out, and they instead went with Za'Darius Smith instead of Granderson. I think the Saints even told them no. So, that's pretty much the sum total of guys you could have possibly have traded because all the other guys your young guys are hurt. If they were really having a fire sale, teams would have been inquiring about, Rashid Shaheed, inquiring about Chris Olave, inquiring about Fuaga, Penning, those guys, but that's what you're trying to build your team out of. So let's talk about Chris Olave real quick. He got a concussion again. It was a pretty vicious hit. I felt the Carolina Panthers were headhunting with that, especially with that hit. He is getting a reputation around the league as being a candle. And I don't mean this as an ugly way, but this was a nickname that the Cincinnati Bengals used to give to poor Ken Anderson. Yeah. One good blow and he was out. Yeah. So they called him the candle. Chris Collinsworth was the one that talked about that. But Olave now this is his third concussion, I think, in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe.
Fourth in his NFL career, and going back to Ohio State, I think he had one there too. So you're talking 5 in a matter of about 3.5 years.
So the story I read today was that he and his family are having a discussion about his alternatives, and it's very likely he may never play football again. I mean, you got to think about this in terms of like Tua. Yep. I know Michael Thomas was out there running his friggin' mouth again on Twitter with, medicine balls. He's throwing medicine balls. Well, you know what? 2 of those concussions happened with Carr not even on the field. Yeah. Spencer Rattler threw a couple of passes that were really wild and outside. And I got into an argument with somebody on Twitter about this too. I'm like, you realize how many times Marcus Colston went over the middle, jumped high for a ball, exposing his ribs, all these things, and we all congratulated Drew Brees for putting that ball where nobody else could get it. And Colston bounced up from him. And to me, there with guys like Tua, guys like Olave, I've seen a few other players like this. There are certain players that once you get a concussion, you seem to be more susceptible to them than other players. And that, I don't mean that in the sense that, oh, he's soft.
No.
I'm saying that there are some guys who, whatever reason, can take a hit and not get a concussion. And there are other guys who it's not even a severe hit, and it's just somebody tackling you from the top, and then he hits you in the back of the head, and you're out.
Yeah.
And I think Chris Olave, unfortunately, is one of those kind of guys. I think Tua is another one. And he talked about, he didn't wear the Guardian cap because he felt confident that he didn't need that. But I think it's just something that we have to look at, that this is a guy that's just susceptible, and it may be in his best interest not to play football anymore. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it could be. Yeah, I think at the very least, I mean, folks, the Saints are 2-7. We've spent the better part of an hour, talking about, how talent deficient that this team is. In other words, they're not going anywhere this year.
Yeah.
I think at the very least, it would be and I love to watch Chris Olave play football. But I think at the very least, it would be in Chris Olave's best interest to not come back this year, to get all the medical evaluations that money could buy, while you make an informed, unemotional decision. Because I mean, most of these guys are competitors. So if they're left up to their own devices, I know I was this way too, and I was nowhere near the professional football level of Chris Olave. The competitor in you is always going to want to keep going. That's why we see so many old, washed up boxers, because you don't want to give it up.
Oh yeah.
So I'm glad. I'm really happy to hear actually that Olave is at least saying that I'm meeting with family and we're going to discuss options, because that's at least an early indicator, that you have some self-awareness, and you have the self-awareness to go outside yourself to seek advice and to seek opinions. I would be surprised if Chris did say, okay, I'm, for my own health, I'm done with football. Thank you for everything. God bless you, et cetera, et cetera. I wouldn't begrudge him if that's the decision that he did make, but I would be a little bit surprised if that's what was done, because he is such a young guy. And when you're young, you and I know this, Alan, when you're young, you are invincible. Even if you get the shit scared out of you a little bit, that eventually wears off. So I do expect Chris Olave to play football again, but I would not be surprised if at the very least we did not see him suit up again for the rest of this regular season.
Yeah, he was out cold.
And
they took him to the hospital, and he, was fine. He flew back with the team. In fact, he was back at the stadium before the game was over. But yeah, so you're not going to see them, and you're not going to see him probably the rest of the season. The last two things I was going to even talk about was, number one, do you see the Saints winning any games after this Sunday?
Yeah. Because they got some bad teams left on their schedule. Now I know they themselves are a bad team, but the Cleveland Browns are horrific. And it all depends on what Jameis Winston you get that particular week. Now, I think it would have been poetic justice if Dennis Allen was still coaching this team, for Dennis Allen to go off, or for Jameis Winston to go off for 350, 4 touchdowns and a game-winning drive. Let that be Dennis Allen's last game. But yeah, the Cleveland Browns are horrific. The New York Giants are abysmal. You have the Falcons on your schedule. Tampa Bay feels like they're circling the drain right now. They got all kinds of injury issues. I think the talent level right now that both the Falcons and the Buccaneers put out on the field are better than what the Saints do. But again, the Saints are going to play better, maybe not well, but better over the next 2 or 3 weeks just because of the emotional charge of a new message, a new intense coach, because Rizzi is intense as you get.
Mhm.
So it wouldn't surprise me if they stole a game here, here or there. Maybe they stole a game against Atlanta. Maybe they steal a game against Washington or Tampa Bay. And again, I like their chances. At least I put them at even betting odds to beat the Browns and to beat the Giants.
Well, they play the Raiders too. The Raiders are still
I
on the
forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, has Carr beaten? I know they talk about Carr's lost to every team, but has Carr beaten every team except for the Raiders? I don't know. I don't think he has. I think there's a few teams he hasn't beaten yet.
I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure.
They made a big deal about the fact that Carr's gotten Allen fired twice, and to me, Allen's firing himself. It's Carr just happened to be the quarterback. But yeah, is Carr beaten the Raiders? I don't think he's played the Raiders yet.
No. Well, his first year in New Orleans was what, last year?
Yeah,
And
they didn't play the Raiders last year.
They didn't play the Raiders, so there you go.
So if he beats the Raiders, at least he's beaten his old team. So, but to me, a handicapped receiving core, a crippled running game. Kamara can do what Kamara can do, and maybe your offensive line gets healthy. The Saints have the possibility of winning against bad teams, but when they play the Rams, they're going to get their butts kicked. They've played some of the softer teams in the schedule already.
Yeah,
and Tampa may or may not be playing for anything by the final game of the season. So I don't know how that's going to be. I would like to see them, like Anna said, I'd like to see them beat the Falcons, just because I've always said the Saints can go 2-15 as long as those 2 wins are both against the Falcons. Then I can just rub that in their face, like you lost the worst.
I want 3-14. I need at least a sweep against the Buccaneers.
Okay.
All right, not at least a split, and then a sweep. Give me a sweep against the Falcons, and then I'm okay.
So Anna, this is the last question I've got, because we could talk about the head coaches. Another time. We'll spend a lot of time talking about those guys coming the end of the season, because unlike what some people think, you can't start interviewing coaches now.
Right.
That's not how the league works. You don't get a jump start on those things. You can put your list together and you can start scouting these people.
Yeah. You can talk to guys who don't have jobs. You can talk to a Vrabel. You can talk to a Belichick, which, by the way, neither of those things are going to happen, folks.
I'm not, and I know we're going to go in much more into this in the scene, but I'm one of these people who's like, I'm not impressed with Vrabel.
No.
Vrabel, I know why people like him, because they're trying to recreate Dan Campbell, and they think Vrabel's going to be a Dan Campbell. But honestly, we kicked the Titans' ass. Vrabel had his whole success was built around Travis Henry. Just he reminds me of Bum Phillips to an extent. Not laid back, fun Bum Phillips, just the mental philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm going to build this team that's in a dome as if we're playing in the snow, in the mud every week. We're going to run the ball, throw the ball when we have to big physical receivers, and I'm going to try and win with defense and special teams. Well, that's what the hell we just got rid of, basically. Right. And, I just don't get it. And I'm one of these people, and I know people are going to be jumping all over me when I say this, but I'm not impressed with Ben Johnson either. I think Ben Johnson's a guy who is benefiting from the fact you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, you've got these good receivers, your team is playing well, and you got a coach that coaches fast and loose. I don't see him as a outstanding play caller, leader of men. So I have I'm very open to the possibility of different coaches.
Mhm.
But I'm almost to the point of I want a guy where we see his name in the interview list and we're going, who the hell is this? Because I don't. Dennis Allen came in with the reputation of he was a failed Raiders coach.
Right.
He only won 8 games there. And the fact that he gave us top 10 defenses most of his time as a defensive coordinator just gets completely brushed aside because he had an 8-26 or whatever god-awful record he had as a head coach with the Raiders. And I don't want this for this new coach because we're going to struggle for a while. Even if we have this great draft class, we've got a lot of rebuilding to do.
Yep.
And we're going to have salary cap problems next year. So that brings me to Anna's question here. Who's going to be scouting the draft picks? Who's going to be making these draft picks? Do you think there'll be any more changes this offseason with the front office?
I hope so, because it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And you and I have both said this on the show, to each other, together, separately, to anyone who's listened. The New Orleans Saints problems are a hell of a lot more than only Dennis Allen.
Mm-hmm.
The players on the field, which we talked about tonight. The Mickey Loomis, which we have talked about tonight and in the past. How about the personnel department and the scouting department? This team lacked depth because they had no hits in the middle rounds of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
They had no hit, very few hits in free agencies. They weren't getting the Demario Davises anymore. They weren't even getting the Malcolm Browns anymore. Guys that slipped under everybody else's radar that you brought in for a multi-year deal at reasonable dollars. That all of a sudden peaked. As soon as they stepped on the field for you. That didn't happen anymore. That's a failure of the scouting department and the personnel department, folks. And I think I like Jeff Ireland, but I'm not in love with him like others. I would actually be happier if Mickey Loomis decided to, and he's not going to get fired. This has to be Loomis's decision to, okay, it's time for me to move on. I'll take another title in the organization. I'd rather Kai Harley, but move Kai Harley or Jeff Ireland into a GM if we don't bring in one from the outside, and completely revamp our scouting and personnel department. So Anna, that's who would be scouting draft picks. But this is where the Saints have to be fast and decisive. If they're going to make moves, and I believe they should, but whether or not they do, they have to decide on whether or not to do so very, very quick, really before the end of the season. So that way they can move as quickly as possible and get that scouting department lined up as quickly as possible so you don't miss on this upcoming draft.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you hire a new head coach, you're hiring them, on Black Monday? You're going to be hiring them 2-3 weeks, depending on who you're going to go after. That you would have to basically have your scouting department and everyone's set, because Senior Bowl is right after the Super Bowl or right around the time of the Super Bowl. It used to be the end of January,
right?
So the Super Bowl is the second weekend now in February.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to be. You're going to have to make those moves right away, and you're going to have your coach in place too. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, their target is Aaron Glenn or Ben Johnson, and the Lions make it all the way to the Super Bowl to play the Chiefs, for example. That means you can't interview these guys except maybe that week between the Super Bowl, the championship game and the Super Bowl.
Yep. If they have a first round bye, you're allowed to interview them in that bye week too. Yeah.
But that means your coach is going to get put in place after the Super Bowl, after the Senior Bowl. That's just a really tough time to do. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I'm like, you know what? let's look somewhere else. Let's look outside the organization. Let's look outside of the traditional places for a coach. Let's find somebody who's been exposed to a lot of different things, and that person can come in, not a retread, not from the patent tree, but has a new philosophy, new ideas, and can kind of no loyalty to any player on that team and make decisions accordingly. That's when they've had the most success. Bringing in guys with fire and brimstone and going to rebuild a new culture, not just keep a culture alive, but build a new culture of the team. But yeah, my own opinion, this is the last thing I have to say tonight. My only opinion is I like, and it's probably because I feel like he got shortchanged, but I like having oh shoot, I just lost his name in my head. Former GM before Mickey Loomis, Randy Mueller.
Yeah,
I liked having Randy Mueller. I'm not so much in love with Kai Hartley as everybody else is. I feel Kai Hartley is an accountant, and he's the guy who does the cap stuff. I'm talking about a player personnel director, somebody who can actually scout players, and I don't think Loomis is that guy either. I think Loomis is a kind of a CEO kind of guy. He knows the organization, knows what's going on, but he's not building a washing machine. If you make washing machines, he didn't build a ship. If you're a shipyard guy, he's been part of it. He's read the blueprints and he knows what's involved in building a ship. But if you gave him a welding torch, he ain't cutting a hole to put into the deck. He's not doing that, you know. I feel that Randy Mueller is that kind of guy because he came from player personnel director. So I just would like to see Randy Mueller come in. Actually, Mueller hired Loomis.
Yeah.
The other way around. And Mueller got fired because he went on an interview with the Atlanta Falcons when Tom Benson told him not to do it. But I would like that would be the height of irony to have Mueller replace Loomis. But I would like to have Mueller in there as the GM / part player personnel guy, but he brings in his own personnel people, and just leave it at that. And then you hire a coach. You find a guy you think is going to be the coach for this team, and coach doesn't need to be a talent evaluator, but he needs to be able to be a motivator and a leader of men. Mm-hmm. And that's where Allen failed tremendously.
Yeah.
He is just not a leader of men. He's a guy who knows X's and O's. He's a good defensive guy. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of guys like Wade Phillips, somebody we just talked about, is another one who's just like that. We've seen a ton of Belichick people who are good coordinators, terrible head coaches. So the problem I have, Brian, is there's not a whole lot of new blood out there. I'm talking about new blood with coaches, but really, if you look at it, there's not a whole lot of good GMs out there either. I just don't see it. Real quick, he interviewed with the Falcons because he was trying to leverage for more money. That's really what it boiled down to. He had a contract on his desk from Benson, waiting to sign it. And Mueller said, I'll sign it on Monday. I got to go do something this weekend. And Benson found out he interviewed with the Falcons, and Randy Mueller thought he could get away with it. And Benson was waiting for him the day he got in and tore that contract up. So there's some interesting stories about Tom Benson, and don't cross him. That's all I can say. You don't cross him. Incredibly loyal man, incredibly generous, all these things, but don't ever cross him. Um,
I'm tired. I don't
I
want to
know.
get. I have names too. Wes Phillips.
Yeah.
I have names too. I refuse to talk about it tonight. I'm dropping dead here.
I'm watching you. I'm watching you.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. My problem with Brian Flores is he's a retread, and I'm trying to avoid retreads. So, and I think Brian Flores is a better coordinator than he is a head coach. And that's just my opinion. People are free to disagree with me, but I just feel like he's a coordinator. He that's his strength. He's not a head coach. And once again, you're just bringing in another defensive guy, and it's just not working. Bob, are you gonna have the Bayou Blitz tomorrow night?
Yeah, if I live. Yeah, we are. We had to reschedule. Everything from a podcast point of view worked out perfectly this week. Brendan had to reschedule from Wednesday to Thursday. I forget why. And then I couldn't. My internet was down. So I couldn't do anything publishing or podcasting Monday or Tuesday. And when I let you know, I had Wednesday free, so we just split into Wednesday. Well, we were supposed to have Courtney Roby on last week. Courtney had scheduling conflicts. Couldn't do this Wednesday. Can do Thursday. So Brendan and I will be having Courtney Roby this Thursday. Lance Moore, who was supposed to be our guest this week, canceled, last week, and moved to next week. So we have Courtney Roby tomorrow and Lance Moore next Wednesday.
That sounds like a great lineup. And I was watching the clock. I kept watching the clock the whole night, and I was trying to wrap it up within an hour, and I went 10 minutes over. And I apologize, Bob. I could see you fading the whole time.
I'm sorry, guys.
No, it's fine. I mean, we had a lot to cover, and then everyone starts jumping in. We had over 15 people in the chat at one time.
And that's awesome. And Team Mama, I saw you. You made some great content tonight. Make sure you join us in. Alan and I are family. Brendan and I are family. The Bayou Blitz is kind of the little brother of the Under the Dome. So Team Mama, whoever else is new in the chat, make sure you're following Alan and I on Facebook and Twitter. Just like Alan does with Under the Dome, I attach the viewing links for Bayou Blitz on my personal pages so you can catch those.
Absolutely. And I'm glad all you guys joined us tonight. I was really worried, us being on Wednesday night. It's not a usual night. I know we have a lot to talk about. We're always on Tuesday nights. We always go over, and much to Bob's chagrin out there on the East Coast. But I wanted to make sure to say the same thing. We appreciate all you guys, and we're gonna have a lot to talk about every week, and it won't be about the games themselves. Check out the Bayou Blitz for the Courtney Roby and the Lance Moore stuff. Much more awake, Bob. Beat the Falcons. That's all I ask. I don't ask for much. That's just all I ask. And in the meantime, we'll see you next Tuesday night Under the Dome. Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.